Hello everyone, how are you? And welcome back to our poetry course. And today we are going to start with our 19th lecture, and it's going to be about another lyrical form, which is the elegy. Um, Let us start by talking about the original scope of the elegy. Let us now go to page 124. In ancient Greece, the term elegy used to cover a lot of poems, actually. It used to include war songs, love poems, political verses, lamentation for the dead, and in fact, a wide range of subjects. Why is that? It's because the Greeks judged this composition by its form, not by its subject matter. It was written in the elegiac measure, and the elegiac measure means a couplet composed of a dictylic hexameter followed by a dictylic pentameter. And any poem written in this meter ranked as an elegy, whatever its theme might be. I find this rather odd because when you think about it, an elegy, by definition, is a poem that laments the death of someone. But in the past, what really mattered is the form rather than the theme. And this is exactly what we call the classical measure of the elegy. It was like this: a couplet composed of a dictylic hexameter followed by a dictylic pentameter. Any poem which follows this kind of thing is an elegy. However, in its modern usage, it is the theme that matters, not the meter. And the classical elegiac measure is not used in English verse. An elegy nowadays takes its name from the subject matter, not from its form. While no rules are laid down for the meter. But eventually, an important point that you have to consider is that the elegy must be mournful or sadly reflective. It should be about death or about a sadly reflective topic. It is usually a lamentation for the dead, though it may be also inspired by some sad themes, such as unrequited love, the fall of a famous city, and the like. So it is eventually written as a tribute to something loved and lost. As a rule, the elegy is less spontaneous than the lyric, except when it takes a purely lyric form, and it is often elaborate in its style. Well, is the English writer limited to any form when he writes an elegy? The answer is no. But indeed, it's a fact that most of the touching poems of personal loss have been written in a very simple language. A magnificent example on the elegy in English literature is Thomas Gray's elegy written in a country churchyard. And if you remember, this is the example I gave you when we studied the elegiac measure. And the elegiac measure in English is a quatrain in iambic pentameter. That is 4 lines which use iambic pentameter. We also notice that elegies often lend themselves to reflections on the part of the poet. And death is the main theme that leads to these reflections. You know, Death itself is an inspiration, and it can be the only theme in an elegy. If you go to page 126, we are introduced to the concept of the pastoral elegy, which is a very popular form during the Renaissance time. You know, pastoral is something that we often associate with rural settings and nature. So if the elegy it presents a speaker who is a shepherd and he bewails the loss of his companion or friend, we call it a pastoral elegy. So the pastoral elegy is an elegy in which the speaker presents himself as a shepherd lamenting the death or the loss of his companion. We have many famous English writers who tried their best to write this kind of elegy. So, all in all, an elegy is a formal lyric poem written in honor of someone who has died. Remember, I said that the lyric is an umbrella under which you can have many forms of poetry, and the elegy is one of them. The elegy often passes through stages, and we have three stages. And this can be seen as the form of a well written poem. It has an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. If we speak about the introduction or the first part, it often laments the loss. The speaker expresses grief and sorrow. And don't you notice that this really parallels the different stages that we pass through when we lose someone? Yes, when we lose someone, we often pass through stages. And one of them is expression of sadness, sorrow, anger, and sometimes disbelief that someone died. Then the elegy moves to express praise or admiration of the idealized person. In the body, we're not supposed to speak about the bad qualities of a dead person. We often look at the positive side when we lose someone. So, in the body, the poet is supposed to actually remember the moments that he and the deceased spent together, and also to speak about the positive things in the character of the dead person. In the conclusion, which is the final part, it often includes what you might call consolation and solace. That is, the speaker tries to comfort himself. Um, a very popular type of ending the elegy is to say that the dead person is actually alive through his actions and through his achievements. Now, let us exemplify. Let us take an example of an elegy. In our book, we have page 127, we have the most famous elegy written by Ben Jonson to his own son. Actually, Ben Jonson lived through many traumas, not only the death of his son at a young age, but also he actually murdered a fellow actor. Not only this, but also I can remember that he lost his daughter as well. So this poem is about the loss of his eldest son, Ben, and he laments the death of his son in this poem. So let us start by reading the poem. On my first son. Farewell, thou child of my right hand and joy. My sin was too much hope of thee, loved boy. 7 years thou wert lent to me, and I thee pay, exacted by thy fate on the just day. Oh, could I lose all father now, For why will man lament the state he should envy? Farewell um, means goodbye. Okay. To have so soon escaped worlds and flesh's rage, and if no other misery yet age, rest in soft peace, and asked, say, here doth lie Ben Jonson, his best piece of poetry, for whose sake henceforth all his vows be such, as what he loves may never like too much. So farewell, as I said, means goodbye. So he says goodbye to his dead son, and along with that, he says goodbye to all his happiness and joy. This shows the depth of his emotions and feelings towards his son. My sin was too much hope of thee, loved boy. The poet believes that he has sinned by loving his son too much. He even feels responsible for, for the death of his son. A person is not supposed to love his son too much. He's supposed to love him moderately. 7 years as thou were lent to me, and I thee pay. Notice here the implied metaphor. He likens his son to something that he borrowed and he gave back. So his son is very much like a loan given to him for 7 years. What he means by exacted by fate on that just day is that his son will go back to his God after 7 years. And this is the extended metaphor I mentioned. Notice that here you can imagine that God has a bank and that his son has been lent for him as a loan. And the day that his son died is the day that he paid back. Oh, could I lose all father now? For why will man lament the state he should envy? And because of the poetic license, we should say envy. Now, Ben Jonson wishes that he would be able to lose the bond that links to his son, so that he will not feel the suffering. And man, according to Ben Jonson, should not lament death because death is a state that we should envy. Should we really envy the dead people? According to Jonson, yes. And this is for two reasons. His son actually managed to escape earthly misery of aging, that is becoming an old person. And the other reason is that he escaped the rage of flesh. Like when a person grows to manhood, he or she he starts to have desires, and these desires will make his blood boil, and actually he will start to have a quest to satisfy his own desires, and in the process he is going to commit sins. So according to Ben Jonson, the early death of his son saved him from two things: the miserable life of old people, as you know, old age is misery, and number two, it saved him the sins that he could have committed if he had grown to manhood. So we notice that the poet here started to make a real contrast to his feelings in the first part of the elegy. We notice that in the first part of the poem, we saw Johnson blame himself for his son's death. He created the image that his son had only been lent to him. But in the next four lines, we see a contrast to his earlier feelings. He now displays a little jealousy at the fact that his son has escaped the miseries of earth and found the peaceful and the envious place of heaven. And this actually relates to the traumas that Ben Jonson has been through. Um, Probably the death of his son, the death of his daughter, the fact that he murdered a fellow actor. All these are traumas in the life of Ben Jonson, and his son was able to escape all that misery. So, death, according to this part of the elegy, is supposed to be celebrated and envied rather than lamented and actually cried over. Rest in soft peace, and asked say here doth lie Ben Jonson, his best piece of poetry. And because of poetic license, it should rhyme with the previous line. Okay, so let us now go to the epitaph. The epitaph that should exist on the tombstone, as you can see, is R.I.P., which is rest in soft peace here. Rest in peace, and Ben Jonson says rest in soft peace. And if someone asks you who lies here, you should be saying the best poetry that Ben Jonson ever wrote. Is he talking about the poem, or is he talking about something else? Now notice that the poet here finds a kind of connection between poetry and fathering children. He is a father and he is a poet. So this could be a metaphor for something which is created. Poetry is created and children are created. Okay, it's true that children are created by God, but don't you think that the parents also are creators somehow? Because they are the ones who bring children to life, raise them, love them, and eventually lament them if they die. Notice that in this poem we have two examples of changing pronunciation as part of poetic license. Also, we have a number of examples of syncopation in the poem, like the one we have here in Asked. Now, then we move to the following line. He says, "For whose sake henceforth all his vows be such as what he loved may never like too much." He got too close to his son and was hurt badly because of his death. So he promises never to get that close to the ones he loves again. Um, Actually, do you think we can control our love of our kids or our beloved ones? I leave this for you to think. But this is exactly what we have in the poem. In the final four lines of the poem, Johnson says farewell to his son, rest in peace, and he says that his son was the best thing he ever had a hand in creating. He has also learned that getting close to the people you love can cause immense pain. So, as you can see, Ben Jonson actually excelled in talking about his son in the poem. But I need to clarify some points for you. This is just a quick explanation of the poem. If you look at page 127, you notice that On My First Son is the title of the poem, and this proves that the poem can be studied as an occasional poem. As you can guess, an occasional poem is written on a certain occasion. What is the occasion here? It is the death of the poet's son. Actually, it is said that Ben Jonson wrote this poem on the occasion of his son's death, which was caused by the plague of England. You know, the plague of England, or what they called in the past Black Death. How old was his son? His son was 7 years old. So there is a personal part in the poem. But can we benefit from it universally? Yes. Actually, the poem can be studied as a poem that expresses the personal feelings of Ben Jonson because he lost his own son, or it could be read as a universal poem which tackles the theme of loss in general, the loss of anyone that we love or anything that we cherish. It can be studied both ways. I want to tell you what we have in the name itself. Uh, our poet is Ben Jonson, and his son is also Ben. So let us start with line one again. Farewell, thou child of my right hand and joy. We notice that the poet alludes to the significance of the name Ben. Ben is short for Benjamin. Benjamin. And that's why he says, child of my right hand. It's like Yamin in Arabic. And also, this is very rich with meaning. This could remind us of Prophet Jacob and his son Joseph. Jacob loved Joseph more than anyone and more than anything. So, how did God punish him? God punished him by loss of his son, Joseph. So this is the church thing I mentioned in the presentation, that we're not supposed to live. We are not supposed to love our kids more than we love God. Jacob, in a way, was punished by the loss of Joseph because he loved Joseph more than God, probably. And when he came to realize that no one should be loved more than God, God united him with his own son. Also notice the religious aspect of the poem in the use of the word sin. You know that the word sin means that someone committed a wrong thing, a sin. And probably the sin is the love, the exaggerated love that the poet had for his own son. Again, line 3 has a metaphor in which the poet likens his son to a loan, and this loan was given to him by God, and after 7 years he should pay him back. And this means that no one should be angry if he or she had to give back what he or she has been given by someone. So, this is an invitation that no one should lament the loss of someone who is taken as a loan, or someone who needs to to be sent back to the place where he came from. And this is an invitation to believe, actually. A part of the trauma is that the boy was lost on the just day, as we have in line 4. And this is the day of the son's birth. Ben Jonson was supposed to celebrate the 7th birthday of his son. But alas, what happened? He lamented his death. Instead of celebrating his birth, he lamented his death. Line 5 also refers to the bond that relates the father to the son. The tremendous suffering of the father is caused by the fact that this is his son, his own blood and flesh. If he hadn't been his son, his suffering wouldn't have been that great. So Ben Jonson is praying to God to help him out, to help him forget this kind of strong emotional as well as physical bond that relates the father to the son, so that he could release himself from the burden of this pain. But then we notice a change, as I said. This change is from the stage of lamentation to the stage of envy. Dead people will be released from the troubles of life. So instead of lamenting them and crying for their death, we should actually envy them. In the case of his son did not commit any sins, and his son also escaped all the misery of old age. When someone becomes old, he or she loses vitality and it grows old, develops wrinkles, and sheds his tears. Sheds his teeth, his hair, his skin. So this kind of helplessness and physical decline is really something bad in old age. So if you are released from these things, then you are supposed to be envied rather than uh, lamented. Does the poem that we have here follow the structure of the elegy? Actually, yes. Ben Jonson dedicated his first couplet to what? To lamentation over the death of his son, considering himself responsible for the death of his son, and this states the state of shock that we feel when we lose someone. So you can say that the first two lines of our poem, "On My First Son," are an introduction to the theme of the poem, or to the occasion of the poem, if you like. Then we can move from line number 3 till line number 10, and we can consider this as the body of the elegy. It laments the loss, and our poet, who is also a father, expresses grief, sorrow, anger, and even disbelief over the death of his own son. Then we notice that the poet started to accept death, and this is an important part of any elegy, that someone should accept death. And not only this, but he tried to pass a judgment at the end of the poem, which can work as a piece of advice to the readers not to be attached to people too much, because when you love too much, you suffer too much. This is exactly how the poet ended his poem. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so far we have discussed almost all types of lyrics. and we discussed objective poetry previously. So we are almost done with this part. I think the only topic that is left for us in this course is going to be modernity and free verse. We are going to speak about the characteristics of a free verse in our last lecture. Okay. Um, so here is the end of our lecture. Thank you very much for being attentive. See you next time. Goodbye.